to start this, tell me about yourself, your name, your pronouns, and what you do.
Okay. I'm Ash Prather. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a trans male queer artist based in Brooklyn. I mainly do soft sculpture, which is sculpture with soft materials like fabric and textiles. I also work at the printmaking center at Pratt, so I have like that good full access shit, and I do a lot of screen printing and silk screening. But then I also do like a little bit of Photoshop stuff and photography because that's how I started doing art. And yeah, I'm multidisciplinary.
For sure. Can you talk about how you got into art, like, to begin with?
Yeah, so one of my oldest brothers, Taylor, is a photographer. He went to Ringling in Sarasota. And he showed me Basquiat and photography and all this cool shit. And I was like, oh, this is so, so good. And I ended up applying to Bach Middle School of the Arts, which is like that was a whole thing. But that was like my intro to art because I was a communications major. So I actually got into writing. So I like doing writing too. But then I went to Dreyfus, which was an arts high school. And I went in for photography. But towards the end of that, I started learning costume design and doing cosplay and like a bunch of different stuff.
So I guess can you talk about experience going from like fashion to in the past few years?
So I first wanted to do fashion in terms of like music video outfits and movies and TV clothes and stuff like that because I would always stare at like the clothing. Like, have you ever seen Pose? That's like a perfect example.
No, but I didn't do. But I
definitely,
yeah,
it's so good. But that's one of the great examples of like how fashion can portray a person's personality or like a character's personality. So I wanted to do that. So I applied to Pratt for fashion. I got in. Terrible. Because the fashion industry is like toxic as hell and just like very, very specific. Like the way that they want you to operate, it doesn't accommodate the type of thinking I have, which is like a bunch of different materials. Like they expect you to create work that's meant for mass production. So they're like, oh, if this pattern can't be repeated and sewn by like 100 other people, then it's not a good one. And I'm like, what? If I'm doing this for a music video and it's for one person, like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So I did that for a year and I was like, I hate this. And I think sculpture was like the only fine arts option that like looked good to me. Like I would look at the soft sculpture artists that were already at Pratt and I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like we get our own studio. Like it's not one big room that all the fashion students have that, and they kind of like tweak and like look at each other and I'm like, this ain't it. Like y'all are toxic as hell. So I applied to sculpture, I got in, and that's where I'm at.
I guess, yeah, like, because I was, your friend, like, when you were, like, in fashion, so I think it's interesting is, like, you as, like, a multidisciplinary artist where you like working with all kinds of different things, how that didn't, like, vibe with the, like, school aspect where they, like, want you to do a specific thing.
Which is pretty ironic because when I first got into fashion, they were like, we love it if you try and do like a bunch of different things. Like that's what my portfolio was. It was like my young arts work of when I was gender fluid at the time, and it was like a fashion line. But then also photography and like cyanotypes, and like I went into Pratt with a portfolio of nothing but like experimental stuff, and then I got into fashion, and they were like, that ain't it. And I was like, well, you ain't it, so I'm leaving.
Yeah, even as a film major, like, my portfolio was full of, like, drawing and painting and stuff, so. Yeah. And we talked about this before, if there was, like, a sort of, like, major program where you could, like, do everything or, like, do, like, all kinds of different things and have it, like, add up to, like, one, like, major at the end instead of them, like, pushing us into a box. How do you feel like you've evolved as an artist or personally over the past few years, like from high school to like pre-college at Pratt, like young arts, being at Pratt now.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that growth is possible, and it has happened for sure. I can tell you right now, I would not be on this Instagram Live a couple years ago. Like, I would be tweaking. But I think that art has been definitely, like, a conduit for me processing a lot of things. Like, when I first was trying to figure out my identity, to the point where I was like, oh, okay, like, I'm trans male. Like, that's good. That's a good thing. Because the way that, you know, social constructs work, everybody was like, so you're a lesbian, right? And I'm like, no, that doesn't work out, no. So the art that I've done has definitely helped me, like, figure out, I guess, like, the aesthetic that I want to go for, and also the type of art that helps me process things, like, in terms of mental illness and stuff like that. So soft sculpture is perfect for me because it's, like, the repeatable action of, like, sewing something and, like, turning it inside out and, like, silk screening, and then also going to source fabrics and find colors that work. But then I can turn it into whatever I want to, which is, like, so much fun. Because, you know, fashion was just very, like, strict, and I would come out of a semester with, like, one piece. But then with sculpture, I had, like, as many as I wanted, which is super great.
So yeah, I'll post, like, you know, your pictures of your soft sculpture stuff on, like, the Kickback, because it's really cool, and it's really cool to see that from you, and it's nice, like, it's nice to, like, have the term soft sculpture, because it feels like a stuffed animal kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's an obscure term as well, because I was talking to my boss, Derek Adams, King.
Yes,
Love
King.
But when I was talking to him, I was asking, what should I do in terms of, like, should I switch my major? Should I stay where I am? And he was like, you're more than a fashion designer. And I was like, oh, shit. I was like, oh, okay, I don't have to be doing this one thing. And he was the guy that first told me soft sculpture. So when I started looking it up, I was like, oh, okay, Yayoi Kusama and, like, Klaus Oldenburg, you know, like, they used to do it. But I didn't see a lot of, like, recent soft sculpture stuff, like 21st century sort of stuff. So it's been nice because I also want to create a space where, like, Black, trans, queer men specifically can be portrayed in the art world, because we're almost non-existent a little bit. So to, like, have the platform of, like, sculpture and art and Instagram and stuff is just, like, really fun. I love having it.
Can you talk about some of your pieces specifically? The one I know from memory is, like, the clock, which is cool for you, just because I know, like, we talk about time a lot and how it, like, doesn't exist.
It's completely, it's a construct. It doesn't exist. But the clock was my first soft sculpture piece ever, where I pushed the elements that I was given. So in my sculpture class, we were given a clock that was just like a normal IKEA clock, and we were able to turn it into, like, anything that we wanted. So I was like, okay, like, I kind of want it to look like it's made of fabric. Like, this would be cool to push the elements. Like, it was my first time working with, like, technology a little bit and mechanics. And so I have these faces that I draw all the time, which is mainly on my Instagram. But it's kind of like self-portraiture a little bit. It's like, you know, being able to insert how I view myself, and, like, how it can trail back to, like, African culture, like African masks was what my friend first told me it looked like. And so I did a lot of, it was cool because what I did was I did silk screen, like, a shit ton of times. And then I cut it a certain way, so that way it was, like, you know, stuffing an animal almost, which is, like, fun. Like, I love doing that. And then I started figuring out a way to, like, attach it to the clock, so that way it looked like it was, like, flying out and, like, coming out of the clock. So, yeah, that was fun. That was one of my first times, like, working with soft sculpture in a way where I was like, this is a finished piece. Like, this isn't, like, a small thing. Like, this is a huge thing that I did.
Yeah, that's cool. Because I guess with, like, making garments, it's a lot more pressure to make, like, you know, something that looks done, because I feel like if it doesn't look done, then it won't be, like, seen as has done, if that makes any sense at all.
No, yeah, and then it's hard to, like, come off as making it look unfinished on purpose. Like, a lot of times when I try to do that a while ago, they'd be like, this doesn't look finished. And I'm like, but I did that on purpose. And they're like,
yeah.
Are you lazy, or did you actually do it? And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to stop. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, love soft sculpture.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about some of your influences? I know that, you know, you love anime and things that realm.
Yeah, well, one of my most recent things besides Pose, which kind of, like, well, Pose, first off, was really cool, because it was one of my first introductions to, like, queer stories and trans stories in a space where I didn't feel like we were being glorified, you know, in a sense that media and the industry usually does. And so that was really cool. But the Midnight Gospel is absolutely,
I love that.
Like, oh my God. Because, like, it's, like, the way that I operate and the only way that my brain works is if I use, like, very bright colors and, like, neon colors. Like, I can't, like, not have that on me or, like, around me. Mm-hmm. So to see, like, a risograph print animated over in that sort of sense, you know, with, like, the grain and, like, the color gradients. Like, I love that, and I love trying to apply that in my work. And then it also talked about things that I'm, like, very passionate about, like weed and, like, psychedelics and, like, the benefits that it has, and, like, oral traditions and magic and, like, all these obscure things that, like, I couldn't articulate as well as Duncan Trussell and Pendleton Ward, but, like, when they animated it, I was like, this is what I've been thinking, and I just haven't said it. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, anime and cartoons for sure. Like, because the thing that I noticed is that I really liked art because it was escape from reality in some way, especially, like, the cartoons that I would watch. Like, I would insert, because, like, from my perspective, like, as a Black trans male, we're almost non-existent or portrayed in the media in a way where I didn't feel like I was alone coming to terms with my identity. So to see men that I would kind of, like, self-insert in cartoons and be like, oh, this is a man. This would be me if I was, like, a full man, you know, like, stuff like that. So it helped me, like, insert myself in positions that I wish that I was in, that reality at the time wasn't able to house. Yeah. So definitely cartoons and anime, for sure.
That's so cool. Okay, Jameson asked a question.
Hi, Jameson.
He said, what's the significance of warm colors in your work?
I feel like it might be because I'm from Florida. Like, that might be some subconscious shit, for sure. Because, like, I'm, like, sweaty all the time. Like, when I'm here, it's, like, it's just warm, and the heat is just so persistent, and definitely just a major aspect of my life. Because I didn't know, like, until leaving Florida, I didn't realize that constantly hot wasn't a, like, universal thing.
Yeah.
So I guess also when I left the space that, you know, I grew up in, I started to apply the feelings and, like, what it, how it impacted me through colors. So, like, warm colors, warm heats. That makes sense.
Cool. Have you been listening to, well, you know, you kind of talked about this, but have you been listening to or watching anything recently that's, like, been inspiring or notable?
Well, I'm trying not to rewatch stuff, but I've been watching Steven Universe. I've been rewatching Steven Universe Future, because, like, it's so good. It's sad. Like, the thing that sucks about Steven Universe Future, it's one of those shows where a lot of people only know, like, the controversy or, like, the immaturity of some of the, you know, fan base, that they don't continue and, like, push through it to get to the really cool shit. Because, like, Steven Universe Future is, like, all about trauma. It's all about PTSD. And
oh my god, like, I haven't seen it yet. I haven't even finished the original one because Hulu doesn't have, like, the last season. But I just found it, so I have to, but yeah.
But yeah, so, like, I was watching it and I'm like, this is so relatable. Like, as somebody that, like, has trauma and PTSD, to see them like fully articulate what I was going through, you know, but like in a cartoon setting, which again was how I was able to escape from reality.
Yeah.
Like it was just so great to see accurate representation of it, because a lot of people that I talk to and a lot of people that I know are just like, hey, so PTSD only happens in war veterans, and it's like, that's not correct. Like it can happen to them, but it's not an exclusive thing. Mm-hmm. So to see what I was dealing with translated in a cartoon setting was like really nice, because they were accurately depicting it too. They were just like avoiding certain situations and like swelling up over small problems, because like I also was rewatching Ozark with my mom. And season 3, there's a character that's introduced that's bipolar, and the way that they described his disorder as losing a sense of scale, which can be translated to PTSD, because it's like the way that my brain works, small things to some people are almost always gigantic problems to me, you know, and like, so I usually regress and like I lose touch with people, communication, whatever. So to see in a cartoon setting that loss of scale, like that sense of scale be translated, especially for young kids that might have PTSD and don't know what it is, or like that they didn't have that issue themselves, like one of my favorite shows, absolute favorite.
Have you made anything, or have you been working on anything in quarantine?
I've definitely been processing a lot. Like that's kind of where we're at right now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I've just been drawing a little bit. I've been playing on Photoshop a lot, because also, so like in Steven Universe Future, one of the things that they were playing with is like a portrayal of the subconscious, I guess. And what they did was they had like color gradients. So they would have like a color gradient and it'd be like a rectangle, and they would repeat it, but then they would also figure out a way to like shift it. So I've been on Photoshop like playing with like the twist option. Yeah. Nice. And like I love gradients. So like the more I can fuck with gradients, the better. It's just so much fun.
Yeah, it's weird. I was thinking about LCD today.
Oh really?
Yeah, because it's funny how like we all complained about it freshman year, like having to do. Well, I guess you didn't even have to do foundation being in fashion. That's crazy.
Yeah. Isn't it ironic that I'm good with colors but didn't take LCD? Like.
Yeah. But I guess I was just thinking about that, and how that's like the thing about like color temperatures and like changes and stuff like that. How that is like sticking with me, and I think about that like all the time, like not just in terms of film, but like everything. So when I was watching, because I was binging like Steven Universe freshman year, so I was like looking at how like the animators were able to do that, because I guess I don't know, color's cool, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I always think about the version of me that wouldn't go all the way in terms of colors, and, you know, would kind of just be a little passive with how I portray things. Like a lot of times I would just use like, you know, like ironically, my introduction to art was in a black and white setting, photography. Mm-hmm. So when I started to open up and explore all these different things, which can translate to like my identity, and like the cool thing about art and identity is the fact that it's both a fluid thing. It's not like the accurate way to describe both is a non-binary system, you know, like a very fluid thing that anybody can identify or portray themselves as. So the more fluid that I became, the more colorful I became as well. Mm-hmm. So I just think that people need to be more fluid about, you know, a lot of things.
Yeah. I know that like you've talked about identity stuff. So how do you like specifically, how do you feel like your identity has impacted your artwork, and like how that's changed over time? And then like academically, have you like discovered any interesting like things that can like relate to the way that you view yourself?
So like when I was first doing art, I really didn't know a lot of things like about identity. and a bunch of stuff like that. So like I didn't know anything about like the gender spectrum, the identity spectrum. So I only knew that I was a lesbian at the time. So for the most part, I didn't really express myself in the artistic way that I wish I had. But then again, like growth and change become like a major thing. Mm-hmm. So over time, I was like, okay, well, I'm not cis. I'm going to say I'm gender fluid because that was the only term that I knew. Mm-hmm. And so at that time, I applied to Young Arts because at Dreyfus, you're required to apply with a portfolio. And so I did my entire portfolio on gender fluidity and how it shouldn't, like how gender shouldn't be a binary system. Mm-hmm. And so I played with the colors of like blue and pink and like how it's usually representative of gender. Like blue is usually like this rough, like buff man or whatever. And it's just like toxic masculinity and like all this dumb shit. And then with females, it's like, oh, like light, just like a dress. And I'm like, come on. Not like, let's quit it with the stereotypes. So that was kind of my whole Young Arts portfolio was like a commentary on how stereotypes are absolute bullshit. And they just accommodate erasure of like how people can identify and like identity over time and how, you know, like colonialism and all this shit. It's just, you know, erasure. I noticed over time that erasure was a major issue. And so I think it was like freshman year when I was like, okay, so like I'm trans male. Because another thing that happened was that I noticed that I had trouble in terms of figuring out my identity because I couldn't see it reflected in the media and in the industry. So I was like, oh shit, like no wonder I had like all this internalized transphobia and all this internalized homophobia. I never saw like a portrayal of a Black queer trans male, which is what I am. Yeah. So, you know, after going to therapy and doing some growth and all that good shit, I started to realize that like the fluidity of who I am could be translated to the fluidity of my works in soft sculpture, and how like soft sculpture is basically the only way that my brain works is kind of just like playing with substance and context and putting them in places that force people to think, I guess. Like with my clock piece, it's like, you know, like a clock is supposed to be like a normal ass clock for the most part. But I was like, what if you didn't know what the time was at all? Oh. And it was completely made out of fabric.
Yeah.
So I don't know when I'm gonna go back to Pratt. I'm definitely going back in the fall because I don't want to be here for a long time. But now that I had like a lot more like identity and like soul searching, I definitely want to get back in the studio, you know, and just like keep working and keep pushing that soft sculpture idea. Because ironically, as soon as I was figuring out that soft sculpture was the wave, Corona hit.
Yeah. The literal like wave.
Exactly.
One of my final questions for you will be, what do you hope to do post-quarantine? Like physically or personally or professionally?
So my growth has also changed my career path for sure. Because when I first started doing art, I was like, okay, I want to do like fashion design. Like I want to do just that. And then over time, I was like, okay, well, I like doing soft sculpture and all these things. So right now, my obscure dream is to be a cross-country tattoo artist that also gets hired to do soft sculpture pieces for like music videos and stuff. So like, it would be cool if like I get hired in like LA or something and I go to LA, do tattoo art while I'm also working on that project. So I'm not, because, you know, as a fluid person, I hate being stuck in one place. I hate doing just one thing, just one profession. So I don't know. I've also been thinking about like teaching low key because I was just like,
which is strange.
Yeah, because I was like, I didn't know if I wanted to be like a teacher per se, but I definitely liked interacting with younger people in terms of like telling them my perspective and informing theirs, like especially when a lot of kids that I talk to, or at least like high schoolers that I've talked to, have had questions about like art school and profession and like what path should I take. And being able to give them my insight, I've noticed has helped a little bit. So if I could give my insight to people in a professional way, that would be cool.
Yeah. That's why I'm glad I'm doing this. I don't even know where the idea came about. I guess I just wanted to like share all of my friends' stories with like my other friends and just have it be like a nice full of.
Well, as somebody that is your friend and on it,